what happens when the government you live under fails so completely that the very concept of money just stops working?
That isn't a hypothetical question for millions of people in Iran right now. The protests sweeping the country are they're far beyond what we've seen before. It's not just episodic unrest. It's the result of a dangerous and I think unprecedented convergence.
Right.
So in this deep dive, we're going into the latest analysis to understand how military defeat, these crippling international sanctions, hyperinflation, and a profoundly fractured leadership have pushed the Islamic Republic to the absolute brink in early 2026.
And our mission here is to really distill the key takeaways from sources that are focusing on Tehran's extreme vulnerability. I mean, this is a survival crisis, and the situation is escalating incredibly fast.
It is.
So let's start by hitting the 90-second news hook just to give you the scale of this right now.
Okay, so nationwide unrest is being reported across 27 provinces. We're talking approximately 250 different towns and cities.
And the spark, the immediate fuse, was purely economic.
Completely. The Iranian Rial collapsed to a historic low of 1.4 million Rials per US dollar. That immediately drove food hyperinflation above 70% year on year. And the unrest began, crucially, not on university campuses, but in Tehran's Grand Bazaar.
The symbolic heart of Iranian commerce.
Exactly, because economic activity itself has just, well, it's ground to a halt.
And the regime's reaction in response to this pressure has hardened very, very quickly. Supreme Leader Khamenei has publicly labeled protesters enemy mercenaries.
And even more alarmingly, security forces have shifted their official rhetoric. They've gone from calling people on the streets rioters to classifying them as terrorists.
And that's a calculated shift in language.
Oh, absolutely. It's calculated. It's designed to justify lethal force and, to silence any calls for restraint, whether they're domestic or international.
And the death toll. It reflects this brutal policy. We're seeing reports that at least 217 protesters have been killed in Tehran hospitals alone just since January 8th.
And then there's the massive external factor.
Right. U.S. officials have now confirmed they're holding preliminary discussions about potential military action against the Iranian regime.
Which is compounded by that blunt warning from President Trump. He stated that if Iran continues to fire on peaceful protesters, the U.S. is, and this is a quote, locked and loaded and ready to go.
So that brings external military risk right into the conversation with internal repression. That's a new dynamic for Tehran.
A completely new dynamic.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's drill down into the economic core of the crisis. Analysts are saying this wave is so distinct because the trigger wasn't a single political flashpoint, but a total crushing economic meltdown. So what are the specific numbers driving this breakdown?
The Rial crisis was the absolute catalyst, but the impact went so much further than just currency rates. When the Rial fell to 1.4 million per dollar, it created, well, commercial paralysis.
What does that mean on the ground?
It means shopkeepers couldn't accurately price their goods. I mean, the value would change between the time they bought inventory and the time they sold it.
So commerce just stops.
It stops. We're seeing sources report a massive shift toward bartering or using foreign currency, even gold, as a medium of exchange. That level of volatility, on top of inflation that's already pushing past 50%, it's just shattered public trust.
A total loss of confidence in the state's ability to manage anything.
Exactly, to manage daily economic life.
And it sounds like the government actually made this worse for the average family by pulling back economic lifelines.
That is precisely what happened. In an effort to stabilize the foreign exchange market and conserve their reserves, they made the incredibly incendiary decision to stop providing subsidized dollars for essential imports.
And those subsidies are basically life support for the poor.
They are, and when they were removed, the immediate effect on the price of essential goods was just devastating.
So give us the specific pain points, the things an average listener can really grasp.
Instantly, we saw bread prices jump 26.7%, eggs went up 18.3%, and overall, year-on-year food costs surged past 70%.
70%.
When you are already on the financial margin, a 70% spike in the cost of food means you simply stop eating as much.
And that structural inequality, that's what really illustrates the desperation we're seeing on the streets. I mean, an ordinary Iranian worker needs about $350 a month for a basic standard of living.
Right, just to feed a family and pay rent.
Yet, the state-mandated minimum wage for a married worker, it's only about $100 a month.
That gap, that massive $250 disparity, has pushed roughly 26 million Iranians below the absolute poverty line.
That's nearly 1 in every 3 citizens.
Yes.
So it sounds like just a gigantic miscalculation by the leadership. If the entire economy is collapsing, how can they believe prioritizing military goals over stabilization is even sustainable?
I think it speaks to the ideological priorities of the security state, the resources that might have been used to cushion that economic blow for those 26 million people.
They went elsewhere.
They were directed toward Tehran's military objectives. After the damage from the June 2025 conflict, Tehran chose to prioritize strategic reconstruction, specifically its ballistic missile program, over anything that would stabilize the economy.
A cold, calculated trade-off.
It was. And it left the population completely exposed to the fiscal fallout.
And it's so critical to understand the timeline here.
Yeah.
This economic crisis didn't just emerge in a vacuum. It was really set in motion by two enormous external shocks in 2025. First, let's talk about the June 12-day war. What was the real impact of that conflict?
Well, the June 2025 conflict didn't just cause physical damage, it fundamentally destabilized Iran's deterrence. The strikes were precision, they were aimed at decapitating the leadership.
Decapitation strikes.
Yes, they eliminated a huge portion of Iran's military high command. We're talking the IRGC commander-in-chief, Hossein Salami, the chief of staff, Mohammad Bagheri.
The very top.
The very top. And they badly damaged key nuclear and missile infrastructure at the same time.
And the implication of that is?
It exposed the regime as incompetent. It showed that despite decades of massive investment, they were unable to defend the country's most senior leaders and its most critical military sites. That shattering of the IRGC's image of invincibility created a political trauma that they still haven't recovered from.
So military prestige was just shredded. But then came the second rupture. The global economic quarantine imposed in September 2025. The UN snapback mechanism. Why was this so much more destructive than the U.S. sanctions they've been dealing with for years?
This is a really crucial distinction. The snapback converted what was basically a U.S.-driven pressure campaign, which some allies could work around,
right,
into a binding international legal constraint. This mechanism reimposed all the pre-2015 UN sanctions.
Okay, but practically, what did those UN sanctions do that the U.S. ones didn't?
The key phrase is ancillary services. The UN sanctions specifically blocked access to global finance and, most importantly, maritime insurance market.
Maritime insurance?
Yes. U.S. sanctions might prevent an American bank from processing a transaction, but the UN sanctions legally hamstring the actual logistics of moving oil.
So even if a friendly country like China or Russia wanted to buy Iranian oil,
they couldn't.
The process of actually getting the oil from point A to point B became almost impossible.
Exactly. A tanker without international maritime insurance cannot legally dock in most international ports. It can't pass through key waterways or get financing. It creates a logistical, global blockade that even willing buyers struggle to get around.
And this directly eroded what the sources are calling the material foundations of governance.
It did. It left the state without the cash reserves it needed to maintain any kind of internal stability.
Which suggests the fortress isn't just broke and militarily weaker, but it's fracturing from the inside. When authority starts to crumble, where do those cracks start to show up within the elite?
The succession crisis is immediate and existential. The 86-year-old supreme leader Khamenei's authority is precarious. We have unverified, though widely circulated, reports about his declining mental health, his exclusion from key decisions by military commanders after the shock of the war.
And the conflict just accelerated that whole succession issue.
Really?
And his son, Mojtaba, he's being positioned as a successor, but he lacks any broad legitimacy.
That's the core vulnerability. And to manage this power vacuum and maintain control, the regime has overtly pivoted toward militarization. Sources highlight that 26% of President Pezeshkian's current cabinet now holds a military background.
That's a clear signal.
It's a clear shift of power toward the security apparatus, particularly the IRGC.
But even that course of power seems strained. What are the signs of fracturing or disloyalty within the ranks of the security forces themselves?
The signs of strain are significant. The IRGC intelligence organization is reportedly dealing with possible acts of abandonment. We're seeing multiple reports of defections, of disagreements among mid-level officers about using lethal force against their own people.
And we have that powerful anecdote from the sources about an officer in the law enforcement command.
We do. A law enforcement command officer in northwestern Iran reported that all the officers at his station believe the regime is collapsing. And his quote to sources was blunt, "I work in the LEC for money, not to kill people."
Wow. That one statement just encapsulates the failure of ideological motivation. When the men with the guns are calculating their survival based on $100 a month, the regime's control is truly hollow.
That hollow core is why they're so desperate. It's why they are now deploying the Artesh, the conventional army, to protect critical infrastructure.
Which is a rare step.
An almost unprecedented step in domestic repression.
So why is deploying the conventional army such a big deal? What does that indicate?
It indicates two critical weaknesses. First, the primary ideological forces, the IRGC and the Baath, are facing massive bandwidth constraints. They are exhausted. They can't control 250 locations at once.
And the second weakness?
The second is that deploying the Artesh dramatically increases the risk of more defections. The Artesh is generally less ideological, less invested in the regime's political survival than the IRGC. They are professional soldiers, not political zealots.
Which also explains why the regime is escalating its rhetoric, changing the label from rioters to terrorists.
It's an ideological framing. It's designed specifically to harden the resolve of the remaining security forces, to increase their willingness to use lethal force, and hopefully overcome that transactional mentality we just talked about.
Okay, let's look at the U.S. role. Donald Trump's rhetoric has been unusually direct, unusually fast, linking their internal conduct to external military risk. What's the real substance of his warning, and why is Tehran taking it so seriously?
Trump explicitly warned the regime that if they continue killing peaceful protesters, U.S. forces will come to their rescue, saying the U.S. is locked and loaded and ready to go. This is the fastest and most explicit reaction by an American president to unrest in Iran in decades.
And the timing here is absolutely key, isn't it? Tehran can't just dismiss this as rhetoric, because Trump announced the capture and removal of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro just days prior.
That's the precedent.
It proved that his threats can translate into immediate physical action.
Right. Trump demonstrated he is willing and able to execute regime change in response to an internal political crisis. It provides a direct physical warning to Tehran that their internal repression is now linked to external military risk. And that linkage further narrows the regime's room for maneuver.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the potential collapse of Iran's central authority would send massive shockwaves all across the Middle East.
Oh, absolutely. Tehran's entire regional proxy network, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq and Syria, they would all face a rapid weakening without that centralized Iranian funding, training, and logistical command. They'd be left exposed.
We also have the dangerous risk related to the Strait of Hormuz. The extreme economic strangulation from the snapback must be creating a desperation that could lead to some kind of radical escalation.
Precisely. Because the snapback has fundamentally strangled their ability to sell oil, the regime now has less to lose from an external conflict. If they have little to no oil revenue coming in anyway, their incentive to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, their economic lifeline, it disappears.
Which makes the threat of closing the strait a much more rational act of desperation.
But for the regime's hardliners, yes.
And the stakes for the leadership themselves seem truly existential, given the reports that Supreme Leader Khamenei might have a contingency plan.
Unverified reports, yes. But they suggest Khamenei has prepared a contingency escape plan to flee to Moscow if the security apparatus completely fails to contain the unrest. That just highlights the sheer existential nature of the crisis facing them right now.
So what does this all mean for you as you watch this develop?
Yeah.
We've seen a dangerous convergence of crises. The regime is profoundly poor due to global sanctions. It's weaker abroad after that military defeat. And it's internally divided, all while cynically prioritizing military reconstruction over the basic needs of a hungry population. This is not the episodic unrest of the past. It is deeply rooted in a structural economic failure that has shattered public trust.
And what's so fascinating here is that history shows that oppressive regimes, they rarely fail at the height of their coercive power. Instead, they falter when the material foundations of governance erode so completely that their authority can no longer translate raw power into societal control. So, given that 26 million people now live below the poverty line and the men with the guns are questioning the value of their paychecks, the provocative question is this: has the Islamic Republic crossed the definitive threshold where repression can no longer substitute for economic viability?